Lena had always been loyal to her friends, especially to her best friend Sarah. They had been inseparable since childhood, sharing secrets, dreams, and heartaches. But nothing had hurt Sarah more than her breakup with David, the man she had once thought was her forever. David had shattered Sarah's heart by betraying her, leaving her for someone else after years of promises and plans. Sarah had been devastated, and Lena had been there to pick up the pieces. She saw firsthand the toll the breakup took on Sarah, how she stopped believing in love, how she became a shadow of the vibrant woman she once was. Lena's heart burned with anger every time she thought of what David had done. He had moved on easily, flaunting his new life and leaving Sarah in ruins. And that's when Lena made a decision. She would make him pay. It wasn't easy to get close to David. He was rich, powerful, and surrounded by people who adored him. But Lena was clever, and she knew exactly how to play her cards. She transformed herself, learned about his world, and slowly, subtly, began to catch his attention. David, oblivious to her connection with Sarah, started to notice Lena. He saw her as the perfect woman, beautiful, intelligent, and seemingly unattached. Their courtship was fast. David was a man used to getting what he wanted, and Lena played the part of the perfect woman flawlessly. She knew exactly how to charm him, how to make him believe that she was the one he had been waiting for all along. David was enthralled by her, and before long he proposed. It was everything he had promised Sarah once: a grand engagement, a lavish wedding, a life filled with luxury. But Lena wasn't in love with David. Far from it. Every time she looked at him, she remembered the nights Sarah had cried herself to sleep, the mornings she could barely get out of bed. Lena wasn't marrying David for love. She was marrying him for revenge. The wedding was a spectacle, the kind of event that made headlines. Everyone talked about how perfect they looked together, how they were the new power couple. But behind the scenes, Lena was already planning her next move. She knew that David, arrogant and self-assured, had no idea what was coming. A few months into the marriage, Lena started subtly manipulating their finances. She had studied law in university and knew the loopholes. She convinced David to sign over part of his property to her in a series of deals that he barely noticed, distracted by his business ventures and social life. Lena made sure to keep everything quiet, playing the doting wife while slowly dismantling his empire. David, for all his charm, was careless. He trusted Lena completely, believing that he had finally found a woman who adored him without question. But Lena was always 2 steps ahead. She started making moves behind his back, working with lawyers and financial advisors to ensure that when the time came, she would walk away with more than just his heart. One night, after a particularly lavish party, Lena confronted David. He was drunk, lounging in their extravagant living room, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. "I know what you did to Sarah," Lena said, her voice cold. David blinked, confused. "What are you talking about? Sarah, my best friend, the woman you destroyed." David's face drained of color as realization hit him. He hadn't connected the dots. Lena and Sarah had never appeared together in public, and he had been too wrapped up in his own life to notice any connection. But now it was clear. Lena had been planning this from the beginning. You married me for revenge?" David stammered, his bravado crumbling. Lena smiled, a cold, calculated smile. "I did, and now it's time to pay." She handed him the divorce papers, neatly folded, with all the details of their marriage laid out. David stared at them, his hands trembling. He was losing half of his wealth, his properties, his status, and there was nothing he could do about it. "This isn't just for Sarah," Lena continued. "This is for every woman you've used, every promise you've broken. You're not untouchable, David, not anymore." David's world collapsed around him as Lena walked out the door, leaving him to grapple with the reality of what had just happened. He had been played and played perfectly. Everything he had built, everything he had taken for granted, was gone. Lena didn't look back as she left. She had done what she came to do. Sarah would never know the full extent of Lena's plan. Lena didn't need her gratitude or recognition. The satisfaction of knowing that David had paid for his betrayal was enough. As she stepped into her new life, free from the weight of her deception, Lena felt a strange sense of peace. She hadn't just avenged her friend. She had avenged herself, her own belief in loyalty, in love. David, broken and humiliated, would never recover fully. And Lena? She would move on, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to never let anyone hurt the people she loved again. But the damage to Lena's life had already been done. Though she was cleared of all charges and David was sentenced to prison, the scars of the ordeal remained. Her reputation, once so pristine, had been tarnished beyond repair. She had lost friends, opportunities, and her peace of mind. Even Sarah, who had initially supported her, had drifted away, unable to cope with the constant media scrutiny. In the end, Lena walked away from the courtroom victorious but broken. She had gotten her revenge, and David had paid for his betrayal, but the cost had been higher than she ever imagined. She stood alone, staring out at the city that had once been her playground, now feeling like a prison. Lena realized that vengeance, no matter how justified, often comes with a price. And in the war between her and David, neither had truly won. After the trial ended, Lena found herself standing outside the courthouse, victorious yet hollow. The world around her moved, but she felt stuck in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Her plan to bring David down had succeeded, but the personal cost had left deep scars. She thought about the life she had envisioned after her revenge, the freedom, the sense of justice, but the reality felt far different. The headlines had shifted their focus from her supposed crimes to David's downfall. Reporters crowded around him as he was led away in handcuffs, the once proud businessman now a shadow of his former self. His empire was in ruins, his wealth seized by authorities, and his future nothing but a cold prison cell. But watching his destruction didn't bring Lena the satisfaction she had hoped for. Instead, it left a bitter taste in her mouth. Revenge had cost her more than she had bargained for. As the months passed, Lena tried to rebuild her life, but the damage had already been done. The friends who had distanced themselves during the scandal never came back. Her business ventures, once thriving, now struggled to recover from the smear campaign David had orchestrated against her. Everywhere she went, people whispered, casting sideways glances filled with suspicion. Lena had become infamous, and even though she had cleared her name in court, the stain of the scandal lingered. One evening, Lena sat in her apartment, flipping through old photos. There were snapshots of her life before David, moments filled with laughter, hope, and dreams that now felt distant. A sense of deep loneliness settled over her. She had lost more than just a husband. She had lost herself in the process. She had fought so hard for vengeance that she hadn't realized how much of her soul she had sacrificed along the way. But the real blow came one day when Lena received a letter in the mail. It was from Sarah, her best friend, the one person who had stood by her during the trial, only to drift away afterward. The letter was short, but its words pierced Lena's heart. "Lena, I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. The scandal, the lies, the constant spotlight, it's too much. I've tried to be there for you, but I'm losing myself in the process. I need to move on. I hope you can understand." Lena dropped the letter, tears welling in her eyes. Sarah had been the last thread connecting her to her old life, the one person who hadn't abandoned her when everything fell apart, and now she was gone too. Lena felt utterly alone. She spent days locked in her apartment, drowning in memories and regret. The walls seemed to close in on her, and for the first time, she questioned everything. Had it been worth it? The revenge, the destruction of David's life? Was it all worth the loneliness and emptiness she now felt? One night, as Lena sat by the window staring out at the city lights, she heard a knock at her door. Her heart raced as she wondered who it could be. When she opened the door, she was stunned to see David's mother standing there, her face lined with sorrow. "Lena," the older woman said softly, her voice filled with pain, "can we talk?" Lena hesitated. She hadn't spoken to David's family since the divorce, and she couldn't imagine what his mother wanted from her now. But something in the woman's eyes, a mixture of grief and understanding, compelled her to step aside and let her in. They sat in silence for a few moments before David's mother finally spoke. "I know what my son did to you. I know how cruel he was, and I'm not here to defend him, but I need you to understand something." Lena braced herself, expecting a lecture or an accusation, but what came next surprised her. "He loved you, Lena. In his own twisted way, he loved you deeply, but he was always afraid of losing control. That's why he did what he did. He couldn't bear the thought of you walking away, so he tried to destroy you first." Lena's chest tightened. She had never considered David's actions from that perspective. To her, he had been nothing but a monster, driven by greed and revenge. But now, hearing his mother's words, she began to see a different side of the man she had once married, a broken, insecure side that she had never fully understood. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," David's mother continued. "I know that's impossible, but I thought you should know the truth. Maybe it will help you find some closure." Lena nodded, though she wasn't sure how to process this new information. After David's mother left, she sat by the window again, her mind swirling with memories of their relationship. The good moments, the laughter, the times when she had truly believed they could make it work. And then the dark times, the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. For the first time, Lena allowed herself to feel something other than anger. She felt sorrow for the love that had been lost, for the life they could have had, and for the man David could have been if he hadn't let his demons consume him. But as the sorrow washed over her, something else stirred within Lena, an understanding that she couldn't keep living in the past. She had to let go, not just of David, but of the pain, the betrayal, the need for vengeance. It had destroyed them both, and if she wasn't careful, it would destroy her too. In the weeks that followed, Lena began to rebuild her life. This time, not out of a need for revenge, but out of a desire to heal. She sold the apartment that had been a reminder of her old life and moved to a quieter place, far from the city's prying eyes. She reconnected with old friends, mended broken relationships, and slowly began to find herself again. One day, while walking through a park, Lena saw a familiar figure sitting on a bench, his head bowed in thought. It was David. He looked older, thinner, and broken in a way she had never seen before. For a moment, Lena froze, unsure of what to do. But then she made a decision that surprised even herself. She walked over and sat down beside him. David looked up, his eyes widening in shock as he recognized her. "Lena," he whispered, his voice hoarse. They sat in silence for a long time, the weight of their past hanging heavy between them. Finally, David spoke. "I'm sorry." Lena didn't respond right away. She simply stared out at the park, watching the children play and the leaves rustle in the wind. And then, quietly, she said, "I know." It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was a start. As they sat together, two broken people trying to make sense of their shattered lives, Lena realized something. Love wasn't always about happy endings or fairy tale romance. Sometimes it was about surviving the storms, picking up the pieces, and learning to move forward, even when it seemed impossible. And for the first time in a long time, Lena felt a sense of peace. After their encounter in the park, Lena's life slowly returned to some semblance of normality. She threw herself into her work, traveled to new places, and tried to bury the weight of her past. But no matter how far she ran, the shadows of her old life followed her. The meeting with David had stirred something deep within her, a mixture of unresolved feelings, sadness, and questions that lingered like ghosts in her mind. Weeks turned into months, and although she thought she had closed that chapter of her life, a sense of incompleteness gnawed at her. She wondered if she had truly let go of David or if she was just pretending to be fine. As much as she wanted to forget him, memories of their shared moments surfaced at the most unexpected times. When she heard a particular song, walked by familiar places, or smelled the scent of freshly brewed coffee. The remnants of their love haunted her like a bittersweet melody. Then one evening, just as the sky turned to dusk, Lena received a phone call that would shatter her fragile peace. It was from David's mother. "Lena," she began, her voice trembling. "David, he's gone." Lena's heart sank. She struggled to find words. "Gone? What do you mean? He passed away last night," David's mother sobbed on the other end. "It was sudden, a heart attack. I didn't know who else to call." Lena felt her world tilt, the ground beneath her slipping away. She had not seen or spoken to David since that day in the park, and now, just like that, he was gone, forever. The finality of it hit her like a crushing wave. All the unresolved emotions, the lingering what-ifs, came crashing down on her at once. She felt as if she had lost him all over again. David's funeral was small, attended by only a handful of people. Lena sat quietly at the back, dressed in black, her face pale and drawn. She hadn't cried yet. She didn't know if she could. There was a numbness that had settled over her, a protective shell she couldn't seem to break through. She listened to the eulogies, the fond memories shared by his family, but all she could think of was the last time they had spoken. "I'm sorry," he had said, sitting beside her on that park bench. "I know," she had replied, the weight of their past heavy between them. She wondered if that was enough. She wondered if he had found peace in the end, or if he had left this world still carrying the burden of their broken love. The questions spiraled in her mind, and for the first time, tears welled in her eyes. After the service, Lena stood by David's grave, staring at the fresh earth that now covered the man she had once loved. The rain began to fall softly, and the mourners dispersed, but she stayed, rooted in place, unable to leave. Her heart ached with an intensity she hadn't expected. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, it all seemed so distant now, replaced by an overwhelming sense of loss. "I wasn't ready," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I wasn't ready to say goodbye." In that moment, Lena realized that no matter how much pain their relationship had caused her, a part of her would always love David. Not the man who had hurt her, but the man she had once dreamed of spending her life with. The man she had believed in, even when everything fell apart. As the rain continued to fall, Lena sank to her knees beside the grave. The tears came freely now, mingling with the raindrops on her face. She cried for the years they had lost, for the love that had withered, for the forgiveness she had never fully given him, and most of all, she cried for the future they would never have. "I'm sorry too," she whispered, her voice barely audible against the rain. "I wish things had been different." The world felt unbearably quiet in the aftermath of her tears. Lena knew that this was the end, truly the end. There would be no more second chances, no more hope for reconciliation. David was gone, and all that remained were memories. In the weeks that followed, Lena tried to move forward, but the grief clung to her like a shadow. She visited David's grave often, leaving small tokens of remembrance, flowers, letters, things that reminded her of the life they had shared. It became her way of saying goodbye, little by little, piece by piece. One day, while sitting by the grave, she opened a letter David's mother had given her after the funeral. It was from David, written months before his death, when he must have known something was wrong. "Lena, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I wanted to write it anyway. I've been thinking about you a lot lately, about us, about everything that happened. I know I hurt you. I know I ruined something beautiful, and for that I will always be sorry. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Not really. Even when things got ugly, even when I pushed you away, A part of me always held on. I hope you found happiness. I hope you're living the life you deserve. You're stronger than you know, and you deserve so much more than I ever gave you. I'm sorry, Lena. I'm sorry for everything. Take care of yourself, David." The letter broke Lena all over again, but this time, as the tears fell, they weren't just tears of grief. There was something healing in David's words, something that gave her a sense of closure she hadn't realized she needed. As she sat there, the wind gently rustling the leaves around her, Lena whispered a final goodbye to the man she had once loved. The pain of losing him would never fully go away, but she knew now that she could carry the memories with her without letting them weigh her down. And so, with a heavy but healing heart, Lena stood, kissed the letter, and placed it on David's grave. She walked away, knowing she would never forget him, but also knowing that it was time to let him go. As Lena walked away from David's grave, a sense of finality washed over her. She had finally found a way to let go of the past, or so she thought. But life has a cruel way of twisting paths, and what Lena didn't know was that this chapter was far from over. Several weeks later, while trying to rebuild her life, Lena received an unexpected visit. She was sipping coffee in her quiet apartment when the doorbell rang. Thinking it was just a neighbor or a delivery, she opened the door casually, but the sight before her made her freeze. There stood Amanda, David's ex-girlfriend. She was tall, striking, with a cold smile on her face that sent chills down Lena's spine. Lena hadn't seen Amanda in years, but she knew all too well about the rivalry they had once shared over David. Amanda had been the other woman during their relationship, the one who had pulled David away from Lena when things started to crumble. "Amanda?" Lena stammered, unable to hide her surprise. "Yes, it's me." Surprised? Amanda's voice was laced with sarcasm as she pushed her way into Lena's apartment without waiting for an invitation. Lena closed the door, unsettled by Amanda's sudden intrusion. "What are you doing here?" Amanda took a long, appraising look around Lena's modest apartment before turning back to her with a smug expression. "I thought you should know, Lena. David wasn't who you thought he was. There are things you never knew about him." Lena's heart sank. "I don't want to talk about David. He's gone, and whatever happened between us is in the past." Amanda's smile widened as if she enjoyed seeing Lena on edge. "Oh, but you do. You'll want to hear this." Lena stared at her, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. "What are you talking about?" With a dramatic sigh, Amanda pulled out a folder from her bag and tossed it onto the table. It slid across the surface until it stopped right in front of Lena. "Open it." Hesitantly, Lena picked up the folder and flipped it open. Inside were legal documents, bank statements, and photos. Photos of David with Amanda, with other women, and with money. Lots of money. "I don't understand," Lena muttered, flipping through the pages in shock. "David was running a scam," Amanda said with a cruel smile. "All those years he was with you, he was siphoning money from your joint accounts, from his job, from me, and from others. He wasn't just cheating on you emotionally, Lena. He was setting himself up for a grand exit." Lena's stomach churned. "No, this can't be true." "Oh, it is. He used you, Lena, just like he used me and countless others. He had a plan to disappear, but life had other plans for him, didn't it?" Amanda's voice dripped with venom. Lena's mind spun, trying to process what Amanda was telling her. She had believed she had finally found closure, but this revelation ripped open old wounds and created new ones she hadn't anticipated. Could David really have been living a double life all along? Could everything between them have been a lie? Amanda stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "He made fools of both of us, Lena, but here's the difference. I've decided to get my revenge, and you're going to help me." Lena looked up at her, shocked. "What? No, I want nothing to do with this." Amanda's smile darkened. "Oh, I think you will. See, there's still money out there. Money that David hid, money that belongs to both of us. And if you don't help me find it, I'll make sure the authorities think you were in on his schemes." Lena's blood ran cold. "You wouldn't dare." Amanda raised an eyebrow. "Try me. I have enough evidence to make it look like you were his accomplice. All I have to do is make a few phone calls. You'll be dragged into a legal nightmare, and trust me, the press would love a scandal like this." Lena's heart raced, panic rising in her chest. She had finally thought she was free from the tangled mess of her past, but now she was being pulled back into a web of lies, betrayal, and deceit, and Amanda was holding all the cards. "Why are you doing this?" Lena whispered, feeling cornered. "Because I want what's mine," Amanda said coldly. "David owed me, and now that he's dead, I'm going to take back everything he stole from me, and from you, but I need your help to do it. We're both victims here, Lena, so let's make sure we get what we deserve." Lena stared at her, torn between disbelief and fear. She hated Amanda, hated everything she represented, but the threat was real, and Lena knew she couldn't risk getting dragged into a scandal. She had worked so hard to rebuild her life, to leave the past behind. Now, she was being blackmailed into playing a role in something far darker than she had ever imagined. After a long, tense silence, Lena finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fine. What do you want me to do?" Amanda's smile returned, this time with a glint of triumph. "Smart choice, Lena. Let's get started." And so, against her will, Lena found herself entangled in a dangerous game of deception, greed, and vengeance, one that threatened to destroy the fragile peace she had fought so hard to achieve. She had thought David's death would be the end of her suffering, but it was only the beginning of a new nightmare. As Lena agreed to Amanda's twisted plan, she felt the weight of the decision pressed down on her like never before. The betrayal, the lies, and the new danger she faced all blurred together, making it hard for her to find any sense of peace. But life, as it often does, had its own ways of healing wounds when least expected. One evening, a week after her unsettling encounter with Amanda, Lena found herself sitting at a quiet cafe, staring at the untouched cup of tea before her. Her mind was spinning, overwhelmed by the chaos she was thrust into. She had no one to turn to, no one who could understand the darkness that had crept into her life. Suddenly, the familiar chime of the cafe's door echoed, but Lena didn't look up. She was too consumed by her thoughts. She barely noticed the footsteps approaching until a soft, kind voice broke through her haze. "Lena, is that you?" Startled, she lifted her gaze and was met with the sight of a man she hadn't seen in years. Jack, her high school sweetheart, the boy she had loved before David, the one she had lost touch with when life took them in different directions. "Jack?" Her voice was small, almost unsure. She couldn't believe her eyes. "It's been a long time," Jack said with a warm, gentle smile, pulling out the chair across from her. "Mind if I sit?" Lena nodded, still in shock at seeing him after all these years. Jack had been her first love, the kind of love that was pure, innocent, and untouched by the harshness of the world. Seeing him now, older and more mature, but still with that same kindness in his eyes, stirred something deep inside her. "What are you doing here?" Lena asked, her voice finally steadying. "I moved back a few months ago," Jack replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "I've been meaning to reach out, but, well, I wasn't sure if you'd want to hear from me." Lena smiled faintly. "Life's funny that way, isn't it? We think we'll never cross paths again, and then here we are." There was a brief silence between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was filled with a shared history, with unspoken memories and feelings that had long been buried, but were now gently resurfacing. "I heard about David," Jack said softly, his expression growing serious. "I'm really sorry for everything you've been through." Lena's heart clenched at the mention of David's name. The pain was still raw, but sitting across from Jack, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: safety. She didn't have to pretend with him. He knew her, the real her, before life became so complicated. "Thank you," she whispered, looking down at her hands. "It's been hard, harder than I ever imagined." Jack reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers, his touch warm and reassuring. "You don't have to go through it alone, Lena. Not anymore." The sincerity in his voice made Lena's heart swell. She had spent so long feeling isolated, trapped in her own pain, but here was Jack, offering her a lifeline. And in that moment, she realized that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for her heart to heal. Over the next few weeks, Lena and Jack started seeing each other more often. Their old friendship blossomed once again, and with it, the feelings they had shared all those years ago began to stir beneath the surface. Jack was patient, never pushing her, always there when she needed him. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lena started to feel like herself again. She laughed, smiled, and allowed herself to dream of a future that wasn't tainted by the shadows of the past. With Jack by her side, she began to believe that love, true love, wasn't just a fleeting fantasy. It was real, and it was worth fighting for. One evening, as they sat by the lake watching the sunset, Jack turned to Lena with a serious look in his eyes. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice low but filled with emotion. "I've been in love with you since we were kids. I never stopped. And when I saw you again that day in the cafe, I knew that I was given a second chance to be with the woman I've always loved. I don't want to lose you again, Lena." Lena's heart pounded in her chest as Jack's words washed over her. She had never imagined that he had carried these feelings for so long. Tears welled up in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that she had been given a second chance at happiness. "I don't want to lose you either, Jack," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've been my light through all of this darkness. I don't know what I would have done without you." Jack took her hands in his gaze locking with hers. "Then let me be by your side always. Let's build something new together, something that's ours." Lena couldn't hold back her tears anymore. They spilled down her cheeks as she nodded, her heart finally letting go of the pain and fear that had held her captive for so long. That night, as they sat together under the stars, Lena knew that her life had changed forever. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. With Jack, she had found a love that was deep, true, and unshakable, a love that had been waiting for her all along. And so, Lena's heart, once shattered by betrayal and loss, was slowly pieced back together by the gentle hands of the man who had loved her all along. Their future wasn't without challenges, but it was filled with hope, with love, and with the promise of a new beginning. It was, at long last, a love story that was truly theirs.